Check podcasts.
The Bread and Butter Collective is a collection of hospitality professionals working together to help strengthen our industry to build strong culture, community, and sustainability.
I'm Kalen McNeil.
And I'm Sam Jones. And this is the Bread and Butter Podcast.
Welcome to the Bread and Butter Podcast. How are you, Sam?
I'm punch drunk and full of beans today.
We're always
mister.
punch drunk and full of beans.
I guess I'm more punch drunk.
You are. You look good. You got your 2% jazz hat on. You got your hair all like you look.
I got my beard trimmed.
Which
I
is
did
like,
that myself.
What?
In the mirror.
Oh
by myself.
What?
Not bad, huh?
Yeah, with like scissors or
no, a razor.
Razor.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks good.
Not
Looks
bad.
even.
A little even.
Yeah, it's unusual.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's usually down to here, and
Yeah.
it makes me feel lighter in my step and my mind.
Oh, I like it. Is there a reason why you did it, or?
Because it was either that or I was going to shave it all off and cut my hair. It's one of those things where, when you need
So is this a gateway haircut or
it's a gateway hair? It might be.
Yeah.
Might be gateway.
So I don't want to give me warning if I have to show up here and your face is totally clean.
And I've got a full mohawk,
because it wouldn't. Yeah, I would. It might actually give me a jammer. So I don't want to risk that.
You know what? Me clean shaven gives everyone a jammer.
Yeah. So speaking of clean shaven or not clean shaven, our guest today is Robert Belcham.
Speaking of beard prowess, oh my goodness.
Yes, and his is usually neat and tight. Hey, Robert, how are you?
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you guys? I tell you, if I shaved my beard,
yeah,
my wife would divorce me in a second. I don't know how you do it.
Is it because she loves the beard so much, or the shaving it would be too much?
Shaving it would be too much. This is we've only known each other for about 8 or 9 years, so she's never seen me without a beard, and I think she'd be gone. She'd be gone in a second.
My dad used to have a beard, and he shaved it off one time, and then showed up at the house. And I can't remember how young I was, but I was probably like 6 or 7. I still remember it. I remember just looking at him like, "Oh, who is this guy?"
Oh no!
Right? Totally didn't recognize him. Cried and.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's classic.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Wow.
Because beards are very distinctive, obviously, but when you change your appearance, but I guess I used to have really long hair. And I had this import business that when I was in England, and I just was like unhappy, and it was so much work, and it was stressful, and dealing with those box stores. And I was in England, and I just thought, I'm gonna sell my business. I left England and came home, and I'm like, I'm gonna sell my business, which I did within 6 months. And I decided I wasn't gonna cut my hair until I figured out what I was gonna do. And it was 5 years before I actually figured out what I was going to do. Or I had some direction. I did cut it.
And then did you sell your hair and make a
No,
fortune?
but I was like, it was crazy. Like I had the longest big, and
I can't picture you with long hair.
No, I look back at pictures. I'll show you some pictures sometime. And I'm like, how did people let me, like Joe Zabry was my wife at the time. And I'm like, how could you have let me leave the house looking like this?
Wow.
Like it was just.
Welcome to the Bread and Butter Podcast, a podcast about fashion and men's hair.
Well, from 3 white guys.
Right.
Like 3 old white guys.
What do we know? Anyway, Robert, thanks for joining us all the way from Vancouver, right?
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm actually at my wife was doing a conference last night at the JW Marriott downtown, so I'm actually in the Marriott hotel room, and it's nice here. I tell you,
that JW Marriott is always connected to the Park Casino.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
I know the poker room manager there, so I sometimes get discounted rooms.
Ooh.
And sometimes, like it's very particular, but it's amazing. The JW Marriott is like ritzy.
Yeah, it's very rich. I feel very prince-like, king-like being able to stay in a place like this. It's a very big room and nice. It's very nice.
Would you like to give our listeners a bit of background on where you've been, where you're going, and maybe not where you're going. We'll get to where you're going.
Yeah, we'll get to
where
that.
you've been.
Sure. I've been a chef and a restaurateur for the last 30 years. I went to school on Vancouver Island in Victoria at Camosun. I have a deep love of Victoria. I lived there for 7 years. My first job actually after culinary school was at Rebar Modern Food, which still runs there, and I still visit it and get a Telstar whenever I'm there.
That was my first real cooking job as well.
Yeah, yeah, it was a great. Audrey ran a really cool place.
Yeah, we had
Um,
her on the podcast not that long ago either, and it was a really good podcast.
I listen to your guys' podcast all the time because you guys have so many Victoria references, and obviously being in Victoria, so I listen to it all the time to try to keep up with what's going on. I did
Oh
hear the one
darn!
with Audrey, which was really cool. I'd never actually talked to Audrey. I'd never heard Audrey tell those many stories before in my entire life. The entire time I worked there for 2 years, she barely spoke to me, and it was really cool hearing all the really cool stories about how she got the restaurant started and stuff. So that was really cool to actually bring it full circle.
Nice.
Then I went from there. I worked at the Erie Resort, which is now called the Erie Resort, I think, up on
Up
the
on the
Malahat.
Malahat, yeah.
And then I went from there. I moved to California. I worked in the Napa Valley for a little while, and then I became a private chef. And then I moved back to Vancouver, and I've been working in Vancouver ever since. And I've had a bunch of restaurants. I have two restaurants right now. One on Granville Island called Popina, and another one called Monarch Burger, which is I opened up last May on Main Street. And yeah, lots of restaurants, lots of days and years of cooking on in this city, and I just love the industry, and yeah, I love talking to people who are in love with it as well. So that's why I'm happy to be on the podcast.
You're also fairly politically active when it comes to the hospitality industry as well. You do Cooks Camp, among other events. Can you tell us why you feel so passionate about the industry to the point where you really do put yourself out there and get really involved?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have no problem speaking my mind. It's something my parents taught me, and I really don't really give a fuck of what anybody thinks. I mean,
I love it.
I just want to talk about what I want to talk about. And the so we have the I have the podcast here that we do called Mise en Place. I've been part of the Chef's Table, which I've been on the board for like 15 years. We started in 2020 or 2019. We started planning Cooks Camp, which is a 2-day event up in Pemberton at North Arm Farm, which is a 2-day industry conference, the only one of its kind really in Canada, probably North America. It's very unique in what it's trying to do, and obviously 2020 didn't work out so well. So the first in-person one was in 2022, if I remember right. So
Yeah, I
it's
think it's 2022, the first one. Yeah.
yeah, and Coast Camp is really unique in that it's 2 days. It's about 250 people. We build a massive outdoor kitchen. We cook everything over charcoal. All the food that we utilize is either from the farm or from Pemberton Valley. We try to um, bring people together and try to. I guess what we're trying to do at the end of the day is give people the best tools they can get from the industry leaders to make really good decisions about their lives and their career. And we do activations on everything from this year we're doing one on financial planning to addiction to cooking to wild foraging to um, cultural dinners and all sorts of really cool activities and all under this unbelievably beautiful skyline with Mount Curry in the
Mm.
background, this beautiful 30-acre farm, staying on the farm, and then just, being together in a place where it's beautiful, the weather's always really nice, and people are very like-minded. They just want to, learn what they can and try to make better decisions for themselves. So, yeah.
What's fantastic celebration too of what chefs do, and a lot of the chefs are probably proprietors as well in some cases or many cases. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that business component of it and just marrying their craft, and we talk a lot, or I think a lot about the artistry and the yeah, artistry really of a chef, and then that contradiction with the actual business management of it, where you know like sometimes the stuff you want to prepare, the customers, it becomes, too cost prohibitive in some ways, I guess, to buy it, but which is so frustrating because it basically, and again, I don't know why I keep talking about this, but just the fact that restaurants subsidize the diners, and and it's the degree of difference is very small. Like, we were talking about our numbers. Like, we're going into a deep dive. I think a lot of restaurants right now are just going to deep dive of what happened last year, because I
Mhm.
think that was sort of the first real year that you felt a bit normal and back to normal from COVID. And our like we never lost as much money last year than we did any other year in the history of our business.
Yep.
Big Wheel, the Zambries was a little bit stronger actually, which was weird.
Got
But
that
it
hit.
really forces you to just like, what the hell? So, but it's not that much more we need to charge to actually make a little nugget at the end of the day. But it seems like psychologically we don't want to do it, or we can't do it, or we, you know what I mean? Like, how do you go about thinking about your price points in your restaurants, and just
Well,
that conflict, right?
yeah, it's a tough one. Everybody has a different opinion on it. There's a
Mm.
lot of things that are wrong in our industry that we've just sort of bandaged over and or tried to sort of semi fix. Um, there, but there's like the problem. I think one of the problems is why it doesn't get fixed is because most restaurateurs, if it's working, they're spinning all these plates in the air, and it's like, oh my, I'm making money, it's working, it's working. I'm not going to change anything at all because I'm actually making money, and thank God. And then on the other end of it too, it's like when you stop making money and you're losing money, and which happens to every restaurant. I don't care who you are; it happens to everyone. Where you have downtimes, you're like you're just in panic mode to try to make sure that you're going to make payroll and
Yeah.
try to make sure you can pay your vendors and all that sort of stuff. So there's no real time that restaurateurs have to sort of rethink their own business model. And that's what we're trying to do at the CTS, and it's what one of the things we're trying to do with Cooks Camp is trying to rethink how we run the industry as a big
Mm.
whole, from a very grassroots perspective, like how to treat yourself better, how to treat
Yeah.
your employees better, how to treat your customers better, how to make a buck, actually make some money out of the hospitality industry without it being boom or bust, how to have some resilience when it comes to things like what happened with COVID, to have some money in the bank to weather those storms. So it's a big shift, but it's very difficult because there's, I'll just talk about BC here just to make it a little
Yeah.
bit easier to manage. There's 15,000 restaurants in British Columbia.
Wow.
And with 15,000 restaurants, there's 15,000 business models. And everybody has a slightly different way that they run it. So it's changing the hearts and minds of 15,000 different operators is incredibly difficult. And we take one of the most glaring one that nobody ever wants to talk about, and that's tips.
Yeah.
And tipping is for me has been something I've been talking about since COVID started. And we all have opinions on whether it's good or bad or what, but it is, in my mind, it's one of the biggest sticking points of why restaurants have such a hard time being successful. It's like you have these people, you have your service staff, and we're very lucky. We have there's a lot of really great service staff in British Columbia and Canada, but there's a lot of really bad ones too. And when you're giving somebody 20% of the sale of the
Yeah.
bill off the top, and it's usually tax free. And when the restaurant isn't even making 20%, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Especially when the restaurant has put in all of the money and done all the work, and then you have basically a mercenary come in, make 20% off the top plus a wage of the bill. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And that business model is completely flawed right from the get-go.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to talk about that. And that's something I beat that drum all the time. And I don't know the right answer and how to change that, or what is the right model. But I think that organizations like the Bread and Butter Collective and the CTS and the BC Restaurant Association, all if we got together at Restaurants Canada, we got together and talked about it and really tried to hammer out something that would work for restaurants. I think that we could come up with something that would be much more equitable, much more sustainable, and um, just easier to manage.
Sure. There's been lots of different approaches to the tipping model, as you said, and there's no right way to go about that. But can you point to a model that you do like or you think is worth exploring a bit more?
Yeah, well, the first one that always comes to mind is no tipping. That's the first
Yeah.
thing that comes to my mind is just no tipping, and then you pay for what you get, and that's simple. Like that's the easiest, most direct, the simplest by far of all of the models. It's like abolish tipping.
We were talking about the wide variety of models that you could go by when it comes to tipping. Not all of them are good. In fact, it's really hard to say which ones are the best because we just don't know. But is there a model that you see as a good one to look at and explore a little further?
Yeah, absolutely. The first one that always comes to mind, and it's the easiest one, and everybody can adopt it like tomorrow, is no tipping, and that we just charge what we should be charging for the cost of the food, the cost of the service, and that's it. Like it's actually pretty simple. The hard part is getting the public's mind away from this idea that they're in charge of somebody's tip. People have this, they want to hold on to that tradition of being able to hold this money over somebody because they think they're going to get better service or not better service. And I obviously don't agree with that at all. I don't think that somebody's wage should be dictated by
It's like
the
a
wage.
servitude
Yeah.
type scenario, right? Like,
Yeah,
which is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. You're leaving a person's wage up to the whim of a customer, and whether that customer's in a good mood or a bad mood, or they think they've had good service or not, I think is ridiculous. I also think that by not paying people what they're worth based off of their experience, like, we all have had servers or people in our restaurants who have been amazing employees, and they still make minimum wage. And they've been serving or waiting or whatever for 10 years or 15 years or whatever. Maybe they have a little bit more of a bump up, but not much, because everybody knows they get the majority of their wages from a tip. And I don't believe in that at all. I think a person should be paid based off of their experience.
Yeah.
And it's also one of the things I don't necessarily believe in a minimum wage either. I think that there has to be a place where everybody has to start with no experience. And, the reason why I talk about this is because my son worked in my restaurants for, from the time he was 12 up until he was in high school. And there was, I was paying my cooks, or my dishwasher, really great dishwasher, paying him minimum wage. And my son, who had zero experience, and he was like peeling vegetables, he was getting minimum wage. And that didn't vibe with me. And the way the business model worked, I couldn't pay my dishwasher more. So it didn't make sense. So I understand the idea of what minimum wage is, but I think that if we paid people based off of what they're worth to the business and by their experience, I think that minimum wage would be a moot point.
Yeah.
But it's trying to argue that is a very difficult thing to do. It's
Yeah.
how minimum wage gets determined. It's a panel in BC. It's a panel of people who advise politicians on what minimum wage should be, and it's these academics who do it. And do they really have an idea of what minimum wage should be? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. All I know is that in the free market will tell you what you're worth based off of the experience you have and what you bring to the job.
I think the argument to that one would be if you're a big corporation that's only driven by profit, then what's to keep that corporation from abusing no minimums?
100%. And the best way to fight that is not work for them.
Right.
Yeah, and
right.
I think that's the point. I mean, I
like that answer.
I've done a lot of, well, I shouldn't say I've done a lot. I've read a lot about the history of minimum wage, and it goes back actually to trying to keep people of color in the United States or in other countries out of the workforce.
Yep.
So they would increase the wage to make it perceived that that group of people couldn't do the productivity, couldn't earn it. So it was the opposite effect back in its origin, the idea of it. So even if you look at the United States, where their minimum wage, I believe, is like $7.60. In many states, obviously, states have moved to a $15 minimum wage there. The issue I had because it occurred to me, I was like a very strong advocate for minimum wages and trying to increase, a livable wage for many people. But
Absolutely.
when you look at our business mix of employees, especially in this industry, where you've got a wide gap between, a 14-year-old now that can work in the restaurant and a career 50-year-old chef or a server that's been doing it for a long time that has the most experience, arguably.
And a family and a house.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
family, house, this. So I have
yeah,
to pay, when you're starting out. So everybody, we go a little bit above minimum wage as a starting point just because that's what we do. But when you look at, now I've got to pay, Sally, the 15-year-old who lives, in this multi-million-dollar house in the Cook Street Village, I got to pay her the same as someone who's 7 or 8, 10 years older that has a family and kids and needs to support them. They start there, and where do you go? Or even the other thing is what happens with people that have developmental disabilities or challenges, and you want to get them into the workforce. And because when the minimum wage started going up in BC, like from where it was at $10 or $11 to where it is now $17.50 or whatever,
and going up. And yep.
and just the escalation of it is, we had an employee that required someone else to work with them. So now, that escalation goes from the $12. We were totally comfortable at the $12 thing to then have a $15 or $16 an hour employee working with them. And then all of a sudden now you're like, okay, now with $17, you go from, a $25 an hour wage basically for both of them to $35 an hour, which is significant. And it's not based on any productivity or any skill set or experience or any of that. So the merit of it, and it's such a complicated thing to get into because there's so much moral judgment and actual effect of escalation of living costs.
And
so
individual needs change.
well, individual
for the
needs
individual,
change, but
right?
also like the affordability crisis that we're in. So we talk about housing. We're not in a housing crisis. We're in an affordability crisis. The land values have gone up so quickly and so fast that, you can't, there's no market. Like you can't even build a house now a house built today is way better to have than a new house to build because it's going to cost you 40-50% more to build it than just buy a house that's in the market today.
Yeah, but the affordability crisis is a direct result of influence from the government. And I'll give you a really good example of this. When I first moved when I was working at the Air Resort, I was a sous chef and I was making $13 an hour. And I moved to California and I was working at the French Laundry as a butcher, and I was making minimum wage, which was $6.25 an hour.
Wow.
So less than half the amount per hour. But my take-home pay, like on my check, was actually higher at the French Laundry than it was when I was working at the area, just because the amount of taxes was so much greater in Canada than it was in the US. And that's where I think we have a big problem about affordability. It's just because of the amount of taxes, fees on everything from running a business to building a house to CPP. All of this stuff is just unbelievable how much we have to pay as employers and employees, and what we get out of it is, it's like, what do we get out of it? I don't know what we get out of it as an employee. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think
you know what the answer is, Robert, is
I'd love to know.
tax fairness. This is the issue because you've got multimillionaires and billionaires that have all these carve outs. So if there's Bjorn Lomborg is very, like, if you've
I've read his books,
yeah, he's amazing. So he was at Davos, and it was a well broadcasted clip where he basically was in a discussion with a CEO from the United States who was basically, and they were talking about Trump before Trump, Trump was president at the time or was going to be president. And he said it's essential that businesses get tax cuts and all this kind of stuff. And he said tax fairness in the world is why we're here. the affordability crisis and in all of this stuff comes from it because the people that are sucking all the money aren't paying their fair share. So if you look at the average tax rate in Canada, if you make over 100 and say 150,000, it's basically 48% or something, right?
Yep.
So you're
Well,
paying.
I mean, that if you don't include the GST, if you don't include
Exactly. Like that's before, that's to get your take home, which then you're going to spend another 13 or 12% depending on what province you live in on top of that, right?
It feels like all those fees and taxes are like fingers closing over your mouth, making it harder and harder to breathe, you know?
Ask yourself what the corporate tax rate is when you look I think in Canada it's around like 26% or 28% or something.
Something like that.
In the US it's gone down to like 15%.
Yeah, 15
right?
or 16.
But that doesn't even, if you look at their effective, like that's what the on the book the tax rate is. But if you all their tax dodging schemes and mechanisms and carryovers and all this stuff, like you're literally most years they don't pay any tax. They don't pay any federal tax.
But I mean, it depends on the business. Like that, we do this too. It's like we have corporations that are hid from tax because of profitability, right? As an example, so we are able to write off our cars, our cell phones, our portions of our houses, and we do that as business owners all the time. And it's one of the only ways you can actually get ahead in Canada is to be a business owner. I mean, people always like to blame the billionaires and they're not paying enough tax. I mean, Elon Musk I know he's the devil right now for whatever reason, but he paid like $1 billion in taxes 2 years ago, like the most that's ever been paid by one single person ever in the history of the United States. So I don't know, how that works and exactly what that means, but I know at the end of the day, my cooks and my waiters and my dishwashers, their take-home pay is small because of the amount of tax they have to pay.
But that's the burden. But that's where the burden shifts, and I think that's the interesting topic because back when the world was great, like we talk about this "Make America Great Again" or whatever. This idea that when was it great? Was it great when there were slaves, or was it great when women couldn't vote? Or was it great, in the '60s when there was race riots? And when was it great? When was it great when the population was in prison? Like at what point was it great? And it's not. I don't want to get into the U.S. stuff, but I think the point about when it was great, when it was great is when we had tax fairness. When people were there was a wealth tax. We had a wealth tax. I think to some degree we still do. But when you put all the onus of the burden of paying the taxes and all those, like somebody's got to pay for our healthcare and all that kind of stuff. But when you put it on the working class people and small businesses, like disproportionately, because if you make $1, and that's why, argument about a flat tax or, like if I've got a business, listen, if you're making $1 billion, right, you have more money than, well, not even more money. You will never spend that money in your lifetime or your kid's lifetime or your kid's kid's lifetime.
Yep.
And if you just had fairness in the tax thing, so say, for example, sure, Elon Musk paid $1 billion. He probably made, 50 or 60 billion or a couple hundred billion, and he paid $1 billion in tax. So
it's a fraction.
It's
not
a fraction.
A half,
it's not even close in a percentage because I go to this with donations too. So I think about, because I have we're a profitable business except for last year. But we're a social enterprise for, a lot of the things that we do. And I look at what percentage we give, which indirectly comes from me and my partners, right? Because we're taking it out of our profit. So we give 1% of our revenue to found. That doesn't include what we give individually. But if you look at the dollar value versus what we make as a percentage, if all businesses or all rich people or wealthy, successful businesses did the same, we'd cure hunger, we'd cure disease, like all this stuff. So the same arguments for taxes, right? Like if you're disproportionately taxing people, if somebody who makes $100,000 a year, like in this day and age, that's not a lot of money. Like if you look at most people's average income, and you're paying 30% of that, or effectively probably after all the other taxes, 40% of your income to tax. And then you've got a wealthy person that's paying 10% or 15% after all their deductions and write-offs and all that kind of stuff. There's a huge imbalance. And even if the dollar value is more than then like your example of $1 billion and the single highest tax guy in the world, it's it's about a percentage of it and where the money's coming from and what are you doing with that? Because when you look at the national debt of most countries, including our own, it's like where are you getting roads and who's paying for the healthcare? So like there's infrastructure failure and you've got an affordability crisis, which if there was tax fairness, it'd be way more affordable, right? Like if your tax rate got cut in half because it was more equitably split across the income streams and who's making the money, then now all of a sudden there is some balance where it's not just on the working class people, which is, it's frustrating.
Well, I mean, it's very frustrating. I mean, we can go into this for days. I mean, this is the crazy part. I was talking to my uncle about this last week, and I remember my uncle, my grandfather, and my father talking about how, horrible the government was doing with taxes and stuff 30 or 35 years ago. Like this is never changed. And this is the other thing that no one really likes to talk about is like, yeah, the rich should pay more taxes and more tax fairness and more fairness and wages and all that sort of stuff. But nobody ever wants to hold the government accountable for where they're spending all of the tax money. So everything that gets spent by the government is our money, and we don't hold them accountable in Canada at all. And a perfect example of this is the medical system. Like I injured my foot. It's a long-standing injury from being on my feet 24/7 as a chef, and I went to an urgent medical care center in my building that I live in, and I was supposed to get a call back 4 days ago. I still haven't got a call back from a nurse to get in to see a doctor, not even see a doctor. So I mean, the money that we have, and it's like literally $1 trillion in tax revenue that's brought in every year in Canada, it's mismanaged, it's misappropriated, it's not used effectively, and that's something that we as the general public and in the media never want to talk about, and I think that we should. We're going off the rails here.
Well, I think we can tie it in BC anyway. I'd like to make a comment. In BC, when we had our healthcare was free because it was supported by our tax dollars, and then years and years ago we had this new fee we had to pay, the MSP, and when that became unpopular, the government took away the MSP, but burdened from the people who need it and burdened it on the employers to pay that MSP. So it's not changing. It's just the burden is changing. Like we pay healthcare and employee taxes on our employees' tips. That's not our money, but we're paying maybe 18 to 20% on money that's not even ours.
Yeah, that's because you put the tips on the check, right?
Yes. Yes. Which is the law.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how you're supposed to do it. Or that's
that's
you're right, actually. I don't know how you do it, but this is the legal way. It's okay. Way. CRA doesn't listen to this podcast.
No, they don't. But I do think, like, speaking to the point, so we can kind of wrap up this rant about government and taxation and all that stuff, but it speaks to a very core problem when we look at our industry and how we can make money and how we can actually prosper and grow, because I think our industry is so important to, this is where breaking bread is so important to life and community and conversation and family. But yet we just sort of disregard this whole segment of actually a growing percentage of the working population or the economy is in hospitality and food. And that's where jobs are. And we're basically just it doesn't matter if these places, it's standard that you can go out of business in a year or two in the restaurant industry. And everybody's just like, oh, shucks. And landlords are like, oh, great, they did the leaseholds, and that'll just get passed over to this guy, and I'll charge him whatever I'm going to charge him. And meanwhile, the effect of the quality of life on those entrepreneurs and business people, like it's a dog eat dog. And then you've got, tariffs coming up. And when you look at that kind of stuff, I'm like, okay, well, the EHT cost me $50,000 a year. This tariff potential would be, we calculated it to be around 50 grand just for our business. And, people and policy just would do all this kind of like, oh, we'll just do this or do that. But every time, like you said, when you talk about margins and your pricing strategy and costing strategy, it changes so often that you can't get settled, into, okay, we're at this point. then all of a sudden something will happen where there'll be a cattle shortage, or, you know, there'll be
Yeah.
some kind of event that will affect you. And all of a sudden, because the margins are so thin, the impact on our business is like catastrophic, you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, that's the one thing I love about the hospitality industry in general is that we're very nimble
Mm,
and we're very I mean, COVID showed us this. Is like I hate the word pivot, but everybody pivoted because they had to, and they did it because it was either that or close the business. And that's the one thing as all these, 15,000 restaurants, 15,000 entrepreneurs are all trying to make it work. And we are very nimble in managing these different things like the tariffs coming up or the shortfall in labor or whatever it may be. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is trying to scratch out a living to feed our families and make sure that our employees can do the same. And when it comes to everything that I'm trying to do with all the different organizations I work with in my own restaurants and all that sort of stuff is to try to make it more sustainable and easier than I had it for the next generation of people.
yeah.
And I think that that's all we can do. And I hope that I make a dent in that somehow. It's just whether or not if it's ever going to happen or not. I don't know.
Well, I mean, and I think that it's like the good fight is worth fighting, obviously, because Sam and I talk a lot about these issues, and we do affect change through our organizations and our businesses too. I guess getting that broader collaboration on trying to solve the really systemic problems, and the tipping portion of it is real. The idea, like, and it's so like there's so many competing voices in it, because you can't, a lot of these workers rely on tips to be able to pay their bills and buy their things. We as a business, can barely afford the minimum wage that we're doing now. So it's just such a challenge, and then getting everybody on the with that one voice. Like you can, like you said, 15,000 restaurants. If we just switched, or even went to 10%, we talked about what tipping policy would make sense. Maybe you just cap it at 10%, and it's just auto graded, and that just becomes a part of the mix. And every customer's now just know, okay, 10% is built in. I don't know. Maybe that
But
model
that might
works.
be a way to step it down, right?
Yeah, well, just take out the pressure off, because its affordability is like, if you look at the average checks, and obviously when you look at average check and what the purchase is, tips and taxes aren't a part of that number. But as a consumer, you're paying it. Like going out for a burger restaurant, might cost you 25, $30. And even like McDonald's and A&W and those, traditionally lower cost thing is getting expensive. So, and it's not like, I had a customer come up to me and say, how do you charge this much for your product? And I said, who do you think's making money here? Like, it's not me.
Yeah,
So, like,
exactly.
where do you want to pay for your burger? You know what I mean? Like, if you look at the sum of all the goods, how much do you want to pay? Like,
Yeah.
you tell me how much I need to subsidize. And he just was like, and it was in a full restaurant, and I was just trying to have a meal with some old friends. And it was highly inappropriate that he would do that in that scene, but
Hmm.
it speaks to frustration. So I'm not criticizing him. I'm saying, yeah, things are pricey, but to understand. So is it our obligation and responsibility to educate everybody? Like, I mean, I
Well,
try to scream about it when I can, but people are tired
I
of
think
hearing about it.
I think it's really funny that every restaurateur I know, every chef I know, every manager I know hates raising prices because they don't want to disappoint the customer.
Yeah.
And that's because our whole existence is about making the customer happy. It's hospitality. That's in our DNA. But any other business out there, if you have to raise the prices, they raise the prices and they don't think a second about it.
No.
Like that's,
Or even tell you.
or even exactly, or even tell you, they just do it, and the customer just does. The customer just pays it because they have to, and that's just the way it is. But within the restaurant business, customers feel like they have a voice because as hospitality people, we'll go, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be raising our prices, but actually, dining out or eating out or going and getting a coffee every day is not a right. It's a privilege that
Yeah.
we have, and we're very lucky to have that privilege. And we shouldn't, as restaurateurs and business owners, we shouldn't think of it as a customer's right. We're trying to make a living to be able to actually, have a life, and
Yeah.
for our waiters and our employees to have a life. We're not there to subsidize people's dining out habits. That's not what we're here for. Nobody else does it, but for whatever reason, the hospitality industry thinks that that's our burden.
And again, I think that's a good point about the idea of the hospitality, and you're always having that sort of pull, and it's a complex, like it's
Yeah.
ingrained. Because I remember when COVID hit, and we were talking about the Bread and Butter Collective. Or we were at the Bread and Butter Collective when we were forming it. We talked to, I mean, our first meeting, we had probably 50 or 60 people there representing all different businesses, and the everybody was just like, "What are we going to do?" And it wasn't about what we. Obviously, a bit of it was what we were going to actually do, but it was like we got to raise our prices. And then, I was like, okay, when we come out of this, we have to remember this feeling of we have to charge what we need to charge to make a minimum of 10%. Like, why are you in business if you're making less than 10%? You can't even 3% of inflation, and it was as high as 7%. So right there, you're at 10, even in those scenarios, you can still make a little bit, but replacing. So as we get older or the businesses age, we're now replacing equipment. So our maintenance costs and our equipment capital costs every year are huge, and you can't do it on 3% or 4%. You're not even barely keeping up with inflation. So
Yeah. Did the equipment manufacturer ask if it was okay if they raised the price of that broiler or that
but this
stove?
is that's the other point is
No, they
like
don't, right?
5 years ago it was 15 grand for this grill. Now it's 22,000 for the grill,
Yeah.
which is like 35% increase.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
we haven't
And
raised our
they-
prices at a, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
I know.
incremental.
I'm in the process right now because I'm in the coffee industry, and I do a wholesale program, and my green beans, all green beans are costed out as a commodity, and that commodity price right now is the highest it's ever been. It's about 4 times almost what it used to be a year ago.
Wow.
And with the Canadian dollar dropping,
Yeah,
and
that's
because
you
there's
buy
a
in US,
commodity,
right?
It's like double because you have to buy your beans in U.S. dollars because they touch that land,
Yeah.
right? And it's a commodity. So I'm in the process now of increasing my wholesale pricing. $2 a pound right now, and for
Off
me,
2% jazz shake off the menu.
right? and I'm like, and I struggle with that. Like you're saying, Robert, like we're hospitality people. We want to please. We aim to please, and raising prices $2 a pound feels insane. But you know what I'm tying it to? I'm tying this price increase to the economy and to the commodity price, and then I'm gonna email my wholesale customers every Friday the commodity price of coffee, and when it comes down to a reasonable amount, which it will, I'm gonna drop my prices back.
Yeah.
And I'm telling everyone what I'm doing, and I'm being transparent about it, and that takes a little bit of the burden off raising prices.
I think
Feels fair.
Yeah, I think transparency is a big part of it for sure. I think that having, we in the restaurant business, we always are looking at other restaurants and where they are at with their pricing and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of times we do this mental thing of like racing to the bottom. It's like, okay, that burger is $1 less. I should be $1 less. And then maybe that guy is not using, Canadian beef. Maybe he's importing it and it's much cheaper, or he's using frozen buns, or there's a million reasons why he was able to get $1 cheaper. And then that guy who has $1 cheaper burger sees that you're at the same price, and he's like, "Shit, now I have to lower my price again."
Yeah.
So it's this constant battle of racing to the bottom, and we have to look at it from what our costs are and try to, show the customer what the value is.
Yeah, value proposition.
Yeah, exactly. Value proposition of what it actually is, and then try to help each other. This is one thing that I love about when I first heard about the Bread and Butter Collective, is that you were, as a group, trying to figure out how to make things better for the industry. And I mean, but we're not talking about price fixing and things like it's. I think that with knowledge comes power, and with solidarity comes power too. It's like everybody needs to be able to make $1, and I think that that's a very good way of doing it. And this is actually one of the things I want to talk to you guys about today. Is like, so with Cooks Camp, we're doing this thing called the Great Alignment. It's one of the activations, and we're inviting all of these different organizations that are in the hospitality industry, from the BCRFA, obviously the CTS, Restaurants Canada, La Dame's Escoffier. We'd love to invite you to talk about, how to align better as organizations, because we're all sort of going in the same direction, and that's trying to improve the industry and trying to have better conversations about how to make the industry better. And we'd love to have representatives from the Bread and Butter Collective at this great alignment at Cooks Camp if you guys are interested in being a part of it.
100%.
You know what we should do? We should take the podcast on the road and do a podcast
Done.
on site.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Done.
That'd be kind of fun.
We'll go, because also I'm going to put it in my schedule and planning. The last couple of years, my schedule didn't work out, but I want to make it a priority, because I think the point about the collaboration and coordination, and it's even about maybe meeting quarterly, right? Or sharing information. And that's the value of the Bread and Butter Collective too, is that we share information and we collaborate. And it's not about price fixing. It's not about any of that. It's about a minimum standard of conduct and acceptability, because it's the only way we're going to change the culture. It's by coming up with some guidelines. And the transparency thing, I think, is the big one. And like, because we battle with, do we put a poster up to explain the thing? And I'm like, yeah, you kind of do. Like, I think people need to know what the reality of it is. And if you have transparency, then you're like, look, if cattle prices drop, our burger prices will drop. Like, it's just like, these are out of our control, but we need to build in a base minimum margin. And
absolutely.
And the tools too, like we had battles, and this is the other thing, is there's so much competition in the, like, the management software and the POS and then the banking fee and all this kind of stuff. It's really confusing to try to figure out what numbers we need to be looking at. And then, so I've arguably, when I looked at our financials this past year, I was like, oh, I've dropped the ball. Like, as the leader of our organization, like, my job and my skill set is to analyze P&L statements and balance sheets and cash flows and contribution margins per dish and all this stuff. And I used to do a ton of it before I got active in all the other nonprofit stuff that I do, but you got to stick to your basics on that. And we had a new system, like with Panasonic, actually. It's a Canadian company. We've gone to American companies. We've gone to cloud-based stuff. And we now have a consistent reporting system that can actually tell us exactly what our average check is, what our customer count is. And then now we're going and looking, okay, what does this burger contribute to our bottom line, right? So how much, like, what is our gross profit? And then how much of that burger is going to the bottom line to get an end result of, like, we're literally looking at, oh, let's get to 5% or let's get to 7%. But we really need to be in a quick service restaurant. You need to be 12 to 15%, just because of all the, dynamic things that have to happen and the risk and all of that. But I mean, we'd have to charge $14 for a cheeseburger. And I'm like, well, I guess we charge 14. Like,
maybe they go on to like a market price thing. Like when you go to a fancy restaurant, and you look at the fish dish, it's like the price isn't there because it's based on what fish costs that day.
Yeah, and I think there's elements of that, but I think more of the transparency, but also having more organizations using this dialogue and these terms. And then I think starting there before you get to the tip portion, and then you've created that conversation of what does this industry look like today and what do we want to see it 10 or 15 years from now, because of all the important value that we bring. Right.
Yeah, that's the biggest. For me. It's about the next generation of restaurateurs and cooks. Like, we see robots and kiosks taking over fast food, and that's when I talk about the sustainability of the craft of being a chef or a cook or a baker or a butcher or a sommelier or something like that. That's all going to go away if we stay on this trajectory. And that's why I'm doing everything I can to sort of veer us in the right direction. And only with other like-minded people, is that going to happen. And I'm not trying to, and the CTS and what we're trying to do with Cooks Camp and stuff is not trying to change the conversation around the world. Like, that's too big of a thing. We just want to concentrate on British Columbia. Yeah. And if we can do it right here, then it can be, other people can replicate it in other provinces. And then if anybody, I know there's a lot of really cool things happening in the US right now too, along these lines. And there's a lot of like-minded people out there who are just tired of struggling so much to make a buck and to run a to run a small business when it shouldn't be so difficult. And I think that by having really good open dialogue and having baselines and standard practices, I think make a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I think the onus too, as well as, we look at what price we're selling, there's a responsibility. And I take this responsibility, I know Sam does too, is managing your costs well too. Like not draining it out because you could be a bad operator for a lot of different reasons and that affect your margin. So part of the transparency is like, look, here, like, you shouldn't be paying more. People talk about 10% of your rent of your sales to rent. It should be more like 6 or 7%.
Yeah,
Like
agreed.
100%. So
That that old model of 30-30-30 doesn't work anymore. It hasn't
no,
worked for the last 15, 20 years. It's a much more dynamic and fluid thing now. That's an old idea, and it needs to go away because it doesn't really work.
no, it doesn't, because I don't know a business. Like I can't think of, and I know a lot of restaurateurs, you do too, a lot of cooks, a lot of businesses, and I don't know anybody that's doing 30-30-30 and 10. Like
Well,
it's,
I mean, the thing is that that's the most surprising thing about being part of this SLMP grant. We're learning a lot of how the internals of a lot of restaurants work, and there's a lot of restaurants nowadays that don't even like they're chefs and they're operators like that, and it's their second job, or they don't understand the business aspect of
yeah.
it, and the business aspect of it is extremely difficult, and it's a whole new set of way of running a business. And I know a lot of chefs and a lot of restaurants that still don't do food cost, and they still don't
Or
understand labor
inventory.
or inventory,
Yeah.
or they don't understand how to negotiate a lease. And
Yeah.
that's why when again, trying to give you guys props about the Bread and Butter Collective of being able to share that information, I think is phenomenal. And we need more of that. We just really need more of that.
Yeah, I definitely think the transparency piece is there. And then just the awareness. So talking about it, having podcasts, discussing it, those people that are, into food doesn't necessarily you don't need to be in the business to appreciate it, because I mean, so many foodies like it. And I think they're interested in knowing the history and the backstory of what it takes to be in the business. And especially the new people that come in. Like, I think, you know, I'd like to think about the existing people, but the future is where, just like you are thinking, is like, how do you make this for the next generation? And how do you get rid of this idea that we have to subsidize our customer and that we're always apologetic of this or that, when it's like, listen, I look at the numbers and how quick you can go sideways if you take your eye off the number, right?
Yeah,
Like just
doesn't
before
take
you know
long.
it, and you're like, oh my God. Like I looked at our P&L and I was just like, and I knew from our cash flow that it was a problem or there was something going on. And then I'm just like, oh, well, our sales are still strong. I look at the top number and I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's good. And then all of a sudden I look at our beef and our beef has gone up 70%. And we raised our price a little bit last summer, but I'm like, not even close. And I'm like, okay. And when you try to do the sustainable model and you try to do all the stuff that everybody tells you to do, with climate change and climate action and trying to do the right thing and trying to pay your people well and give benefits, and the list is long. When my brother's in a business in the oil sector that has 30% margins, net margins.
Yeah.
Right. So the swings when the people raise prices or whatever, he's just like, whatever. It goes to 28%. Big deal. When it goes to 25%, he then, okay, well, let's creep it up. But it's a totally different business. And I'm involved a little bit with, business advice to him. So seeing those two different things, and I'm like a duck on the water that's pedaling like a million miles an hour. Well, he's just like, he's the eagle that's flying, like whatever. He's
Come down to swoop down, get that duck.
He's gonna come get the duck, or I'm a fish in the water underneath swimming. The minnow that gets picked up by the eagle.
I remember talking to a business development guy from National Bank once, and he didn't really understand the restaurant business, and he was asking what profit margins were. And I was talking to him about it, and he was just laughing. He just like, why do people get into the restaurant business? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, there's
at all.
like the
For all
passion
kinds of
it.
different profits, time management, like
I
freedom.
talk about because I'm getting a lot into the food security side and looking at the risk of climate change is a part of that, but also, where you buy your product and supporting local farms and all that, but also build capacity, because even if everybody decided to buy from the local farm, they'd be cleaned out,
Yeah.
and then there's a problem there too with their business models, and they're farmers, but they're not business people. And I want to make sure that we can get good, healthy, nutrient dense food locally in when there's a crisis, right? And all the immigrants getting deported, we're going to run into some issues with produce pricing and availability coming up in the next year or two, probably. And how do we build a robust stuff? But it's, when you're doing that, you're trying to, how many battles can you fight all at the same time, And
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's
you,
the hardest part. And I think you have to, if you have a strong business and a strong, like, and you're making money as a restaurant, then you can make much better decisions as opposed to always having to be backpedaling or trying to bob and weave because you're just trying to keep your own business afloat. If you're able to build a strong foundation within your own business and make a good solid amount of profit every year, then you can really, that's a sustainable business and that's what you want. And then you can start making better decisions on where you're getting your food from, and how you're, and the benefits that you're giving, and as the demographics of your business change and year over year, and it will always evolve, then you have the capacity to be able to evolve with it as opposed to always just backpedaling and trying to figure it out.
Absolutely. Hey, I got a two-parter for you, a two-part question. First one is thinking ahead to the future of the hospitality industry and the restaurant industry in the economic climate we're in. I've heard and I've been thinking about it, and I tend to agree, and I want your opinion on this. In the future, we're probably going to be left with really high-end restaurants and then fast food with very few options in between, just because of the economics of our business. So I want your opinion on that, and that's going forward in time. And then I want you to think about, if you could go backwards in time, any time in the past, to see and experience the hospitality industry and enjoy the food and everything that's involved in it, what time period would you go back to?
Well, the second part of your question is probably easy. It's like when I first got into being a cook and being a chef was in the 90s. So, that's when I remember my first fine dining experience ever was at the Airy Resort, and James Kendall was in the dining room with Jacques. I can't remember Jacques' last name. I ended up working there. So that time was magical to me because it was just such a new experience. And then having the opportunity to go to Lumiere after it had just opened, and Star Anise when Rob Clark and Julian Bond were there, and it was really, really cool time because it was like so eye-opening, and it was something that I never knew existed. And I grew up in northern Alberta. Eating out for a fancy meal was like, a sit-down restaurant, like,
Mr. Mike's or somewhere.
yeah, Mr. Mike's or something like that. It was Boston Pizza, like that was a
Yeah.
fancy meal for my family. We never really ate out. So to understand and learn that there's this whole world of fine dining, I had no idea about it. So that was really cool. Your first question though is like that's a really tough to answer. It's like, I don't think that I think what's going to happen is there's going to be there will always be fast food, and that's just because it is what it is. It's a moneymaker. There's corporations who run it. What I think is slowly going to shift is not necessarily the deterioration of other types of restaurant. I think that people are just going to be making better decisions to make their businesses more sustainable. And this is what I'm hoping for, and that they're utilizing more local ingredients, and they're utilizing the talent that's within their communities and the people that are within their communities. That's what I'm hoping for. I don't there's there in that there can be a place like Zambrie's, there can be a place like Published on Main, there can be a place like Burdock and Co, there can be a place like what Campagnola was back in the day. I think that there's an opportunity for all of those kinds of restaurants to survive, as long as the customer base understands what it is they're trying to do. That's the hardest part,
Yeah.
is try to change people's perspective on where the value lies, And that's our jobs as operators. We have to do that within our branding and our marketing and how we present that to the customer at the end of the day. We're going to make that happen or not make that happen.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a great way to kind of wrap up our podcast, because I think we can all agree that we need our organizations, like-minded people, to start collaborating more, and then sharing the message, and also coming up with some of these hard and fast rules where we can actually protect our industry, do good by our staff, but to be able to produce like top-notch, world-class food, which we all are doing in our own way. But we want to be able to pay our bills at the end of the day.
I also want to be able to share it with as many people as I can. I don't want it to be exclusive. And just to kind of follow up on that, in my mind, I guess I'm thinking as the middle class of our society is being kind of diluted, and more people are becoming poor, and a few people are always going to be rich. The price and cost of food is going to be affordable for the people who can afford it. And I just have a sinking feeling that more people are going to not be able to afford that middle price anymore, or they're going to find it harder to justify spending.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you, Sam. I don't think that there's a middle class anymore. I really don't.
It's already gone.
It's gone.
Yeah,
Already.
Okay.
I think the middle class is gone. I think that there's like, I don't feel myself as being rich at all, but I mean, I own an apartment in Vancouver. I mean, that's unattainable for, the rest of the world, like 80% of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like we're very well off in Canada and North America. We're unbelievably lucky here. And you want to use the word privilege, like that's being born into Canada, being born here or living here. That's a real privilege in my mind, because we're not poor, and you don't. And in Canada, you don't have to be poor. Like, I mean, there are poor people here. Don't get me wrong. There are people who have fallen hard times and bad things happen. People, there's addiction issues. There's lots of issues here always, and there always will be. But we have it very, very good in North America. And anybody who tells you different is just not looking at the rest of the world. Like you just have to look at a place like India or Bangladesh or, Cambodia, parts of Africa. Like there's real poverty in those places. And we are so bloody lucky. Like when people complain about how awful the government is or how awful it is to live in Vancouver.
That's a privilege right there.
Yeah. I'm just
complain.
Like, you're a moron. Like you have no idea how lucky you are right now.
Why don't you go to these countries and see how happy people are with absolutely abject poverty, and they're smiling and laughing and playing, and it's inspiring actually, because that's where you talk about the privilege is like it's a privilege to say to the government, damn you tax us, tax fairness is wrong, and this is that and this like it's a huge privilege. And I think that's the shift, right?
I always talk about the phone as like I talk about this with my son all the time. My son's 22, and we didn't have phones when I was 22 like this, like where you literally have the world's knowledge in your pocket.
Yeah.
Where if you wanted to look something up, you had to go to an encyclopedia and look it up because there was no internet. That is real. Like that's unbelievable. Like to have the knowledge of anything that you can think of or anything that anybody's ever thought of, it's in your pocket. And that is like, to me, that is unbelievable. It's just unfathomable. Like this is the stuff Carl Sagan was talking about, in the 70s.
Yeah, I'm just reading his book, one of his books, the Demon book, right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're incredibly lucky right now. I think that there's more art, there's more literature, there's more beautiful things now than there's ever been in the history of mankind. And you go back 100 years. I was talking about this yesterday to a friend of mine. It's like, up until like the 40s, a hot shower was unknown. Yeah. Like, can you imagine every morning you take a hot shower, but your great grandfather had never had one in his entire life? And, even having a hot bath was sort of a luxury if you lived maybe you got it if you lived in a city or you were able to, afford to have a hot bath. But like just being clean, like
it's a privilege. And when you talk about this phone, hey Siri, how can you make money in the restaurant industry? Right? Oh, there it is. Hey, Chat GPT, build me a business plan where I can actually profit. Okay, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's what we need to be doing. One last thing to wrap up. I know you're going to negotiate a lease. We just negotiated our lease at Zambrie's, and same. I think we were paying $30. They went up $2 a square foot, $32. So there's an example. You can quote your landlord when you talk to him. Hey, I have under good knowledge that very little increase. That's effectively after inflation. It's like a decrease.
Yeah, that's not bad. I mean, I can't think of any place in Vancouver that's $32 a square foot. Actually,
divide $2 between 30, and there's your percentage increase that you can accept.
Yeah,
that'll set you. I don't know if it's going to go that way, but
you're hoping.
Yeah, I'm hoping for you. So good luck with that, and awesome talking to you. Good luck with the Cooks Camp. Although we are going to be there, we're going to travel our podcast.
That would be really great.
Let's go.
I think you guys should come. It'd be awesome to have you.
Send us the dates. It's in September, right?
Yeah, September 10th and 11th. It's the middle of the week. It's a Tuesday, Wednesday.
Perfect.
We always have it in the middle of the week because the restaurant industry is busy on the weekends, so that's when we do it. And it's a great getaway. I tell you, you will have the best time, and I can guarantee you that there's no better food being served in Canada than those 2 days at that spot. Like, it's just not possible.
I love it. Well, I'm going to bring a crew. Actually, I'm going to bring some people from Zambrie's and some people from Big Wheel. And Vivi can come. Our producer Vivi, if she wants.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Try to convince Peter. I've been trying to convince Peter for like 5 years. So
I'm going to bring him.
That's perfect.
Assuming he's not in Italy. He's talking about going to Italy, but I'll make sure. I'm going to book it right now.
Okay.
So,
cool.
And I look forward to it. I'll see you next Friday.
Yeah, I can't wait to have you on the podcast, Colin.
Yeah, I look forward to it. It'll be awesome.
We got to have you on the podcast too and talk about coffee. I love. I didn't get in coffee until I was 40. So.
Oh wow.
Whenever I'm in Victoria, I go to one of your shops, and I love it. So.
Thanks. Well, I'm happy to be on anytime and wax poetically about coffee.
We'll have you and Doug on. Actually, that'd be really good.
Oh, that would be awesome.
We could talk about roasters all day long. That'd be awesome. Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks for making time for us from across the pond.
We'll see you soon.
Take care, brother.
Bye.
Bread and Butter Collective's membership includes the following local businesses: 2% Jazz, Bunny's Kitchen, Buzz Coffee House, Eagle-Ite, Big Wheel Burger, Blue Mountain Solutions, Bodega Tapas Wine Bar, Eva Schnitzel House, Farmsgate Foods and Catering, Victoria Chocolate and Company, Drum Roaster Coffee, Habit Coffee, Foo Asian Street Food, the Culinary Arts Program at Camosun, Cafe Fantastico, Fall Epi, Harold Street Brewworks, Hey Happy, House of Botang, Nikkei Ramen Ya, Jenny Marie's Cracker Company, La Pasta, La Rue Patisserie, Mocha House, Part and Parcel, Poco a Pinto Bar, Pizzeria Prima Strada, Keating Pizza, Roast, Table 9 Consulting, Sherwood Cafe and Bar, Sweets by Selena, The Collective Wine Bar and Kitchen, The Drake, Tapa Bar, The Nimble Bar Company, Ruth and Dean, The Whole Beast, The Wienery, Spoon's Diner, Truffles-Inspired Catering, and Zambrie's.
To hear more from the Bread and Butter Collective, go to checknews.ca/podcasts on Check Plus, or find us on your favorite podcasting platform.